We have to do something. They say, because we're destroying the planet, the Earth has a fever. If we're true, would be a legitimate argument, right? But if you're screaming fire in a crowded theater, then it's a wicked argument to make when there's no fire at all. You're just trying to move people.
There are three core claims that are propping up the entire movement.
In Michigan, they've done some wonderful studies at the university level, illustrating the fact that when you increase carbon dioxide, plant life grows wildly.
If you Google optimum CO2 concentration for plant growth, those plants, which all life depends on as their food source, you will find that it is 4 times the present level.
You can go back to the era here on planet Earth. Levels of carbon dioxide were probably 6 to maybe 12 times higher than today.
We're not at a high point now. We're at a low point.
Foliage was all over the planet.
Carbon pollution is now a common term that people are using, when in fact, if CO2 fell below 150 parts per million in the global atmosphere, all the plants would die. And then what would we eat? There wouldn't be anything left to eat but rocks at that point. Frost and ice are the enemy of life. You come from the tropics into the temperate zone and then the Arctic, you lose 99% of species biodiversity.
Which means that quite the opposite of what the alarmists say, global warming won't lead to more extinctions. It will lead to protecting more species from extinctions.
Over 115 different countries and territories are dying off by not having the 2.1 children per woman that is necessary for a country to survive. Population has increased in recent years because of modern medicine, and our environment has become so much cleaner. The world could easily handle 100 billion people, but it will never even reach 10 billion. As soon as this generation of elderly start dying off, population will decline for as far as the demographer's eye can see.
You know, you could move the entire population of the globe to the state of Texas, use a third of it for living space, a third for factories and workplaces, and another third for recreation, and you could leave the entire rest of the world completely uninhabited.
You don't have to dig very deep into the key people and groups involved for it to become crystal clear why they continue to promote these lies.
Karl Marx really got the entire modern environmental movement rolling. It's well documented. In fact, you can go back to 1883, a paper that was written by Frederick Engels and Karl Marx, Dialectics of Nature. They talk about global cooling. They were trying to scare people into believing that mankind's pollution was going to put the Earth into a free fall temperature-wise, and there would be no life whatsoever. Ray Lankester studies at the feet of Karl Marx and comes up with a saying that is really, I mean, it's at the heart of the environmental movement today. Humans are the insurgent sons of nature. Interestingly, Ray Lankester had a disciple who was named Arthur Tainsley. Arthur Tainsley coined the term ecology. The word ecology was essentially fashioned by a disciple of Karl Marx.
And it keeps going. Earth Day is celebrated on April 22nd each year because that was Vladimir Lenin, the founder of the Soviet Union's birthday. And Gus Hall, who wrote the book Ecology that helped get the movement rolling, was the head of the Communist Party USA.
The modern engine of the environmental movement is the United Nations.
You have to remember, the United Nations Charter was written by Alger Hiss, one of the most notorious Soviet spies working in the FDR administration. People don't know that.
When my friend was training in Moscow, the Soviets were openly telling all of their students from all over the world, the United Nations is our thing. We own it. This is our instrument for policy. This is our baby.
Maurice Strong has headed up the entire environmental program of the United Nations for decades and is the father of Agenda 21. He said, quote, Agenda 21 is a blueprint for constructing the new world order. It is vital people grasp this, unquote. He picked Gro Harlem Brundtland to write out the world's environmental agenda in a document titled Our Common Future, which is where the term sustainable development was used for the first time. Guess who she was? The former vice president of the World Socialist Party, the group that Karl Marx himself started. The icing on the cake is the next player I came across, Mikhail Gorbachev, the murderous communist dictator. Guess what he did immediately upon stepping down from the Soviet Union? He started an environmental group, Green Cross International.
You mentioned Gorbachev. He has no problem at all switching gears from the Soviet destroyer of the environment, comes to America, he's the savior of the environment. But what's he promoting? Bigger government, more control, more power to the United Nations, less individual freedom, all of the agenda of collectivism. He's doing exactly the same thing in San Francisco that he was doing in Moscow.
And he isn't just some fringe player. He is one of the leaders. When I found out that the Earth Charter, which is supposed to be the new 10 Commandments for the 21st century, was written by Mr. Gorbachev, it was clear. Environmentalism isn't just like communism. It is communism. You couldn't make this stuff up.
A lot of the people in the peace movement were in fact more pro-Russia and anti-American than anything. And they brought their neo-Marxism with them into the environmental movement, pushing it to the extreme left of the political spectrum. Greenpeace and their allies and a whole bunch of other fellow travelers have adopted these agendas, which actually, if they were brought into effect, would cause more damage to people and the environment than if we just went about our sort of conventional way that we're on now.
Environmental brainwashing. We have to do something, right? How many of you saw clips of the girl speaking to the UN, the 16-year-old girl? So now what they do is they take children. Now, ostensibly, she's an expert on the environment. She really has a reason to be passionate about the environment. But what does that tell us when you see a 16-year-old being used to speak to the UN? What does that tell you? Indoctrination? What else? They're after that generation? What else? Jim? Atheism? What else? They're bankrupt scientifically. If you've got to get a 16-year-old girl to come tell the United Nations why we need global warming, it says the facts are not on their side. I mean, if you've got facts on your side, why would you put a 16-year-old up there? She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's blind, and Elaine, she's repeating what she's been told. How many of you believe that the Amazon rainforest is burning down? That's what we were told, right? It's a lie. That same thing was told to us when we were there. We lived there, okay? And they were told, oh, the rainforest. Now, I'm not going to deny for a moment that there are farmers out there burning off sections so they can farm it, because the land, after they burn off the vegetation, is very rich for growing crops. And I'm not going to deny that they're not always good users of the land, but they're not destroying the rainforest. We have a missionary with the mission we used to be with, who lives in Belém. And I just read his report, and he says, folks, we had one of the wettest years on record. For them to say that the rainforest is burning down is just not true. It's an agenda. It's part of talking points. Is there fire? Are there fires going on? Yes. Guess who's doing it? There are people that were tribal people and are trying to come out of tribalism to actually make an existence living with farming. And so they're going to do what's necessary to survive and grow crops. So They try and imply that by doing this, we're destroying these indigenous tribes, and it's just the opposite. It's a lie. But see, these people can take facts and manipulate them, and they'll show pictures in many cases, like what they did at the border when they took pictures of the cages and said, that's what Trump has done. They were pictures from during Obama's administration. So where did they get the pictures of the Amazon burning? Probably from 10, 15 years ago. Okay? They're constantly, they get, things to back up what they're saying, and they're being fed lies. So, all right, environmental brainwashing. What about carbon dioxide? Carbon dioxide is the big enemy, right? That's what we've been told. Carbon dioxide is pollution, right? Carbon dioxide is what plants need. It's like fertilizer for the plants. And you say, well, so why is that important? Because the plants are what give us back oxygen. So this whole absurd notion that we've got to stop the carbon dioxide poisoning. If it was carbon monoxide, fine. We're talking carbon dioxide. Just also to put this in perspective, what percentage of our atmosphere is carbon dioxide? I mean, when we were in high school, we learned, let's see, the atmosphere is made up of 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and 1% other gases. Oh, so carbon dioxide is only 1%? No, it's not even close to 1%. Carbon dioxide makes up 4/100ths of 1% of the atmosphere. 4/100ths of 1%. Now think about that. So if we increase carbon dioxide a little bit, it's still going to be 4/100ths of 1%. It just isn't the big threat that everybody's saying. Yes, Aaron? Absolutely. Absolutely. So the plants need carbon dioxide. By the way, was carbon dioxide higher at one time in the past? Yes, before the flood, carbon dioxide was like crazy, and that's why the vegetation was way more than it is today. So as they pointed out, if you reduce the carbon dioxide, if it belows 150 million parts per million, what do we end up with? We end up with plants dying all over the earth. I'm looking the wrong side of my card. Okay? So he says you can go back to the era here on planet Earth when levels of carbon dioxide were 6 to 12 times higher than what they are today. We're not at a high point. We're at a low point. If you drop it below 150 parts per million, which we're not, where'd they say we're at right now? It's just a little bit above that. Plants will die all over the planet. And then what would we eat? Who said that? Who made those? Who told it? Who in the film did this part? Did you catch it? Guy by the name of Patrick Moore. He was one of the original founders of Greenpeace. Say, well, Greenpeace, they're the guys promoting all this environmentalism. No, he pulled out of it because it was taken over by communists. And that's what we need to understand. It's a leftist agenda. So the idea that, and by the way, global warming, the enemy of life on Earth isn't warming, it's freezing. Did you ever try and grow a garden on frozen ground? Doesn't work very well, does it? So the idea that if the temperature rises a little bit, and by the way, the problem of the sea level rising, if the sea level does rise significantly, I know the answer. I have the solution. It's called Nevada. It's such a brain-dead easy solution. It's called Nevada. So when you take a 16-year-old child and pump her head full of panic, the world is going to end. And so she repeats it all tearful because she doesn't know any better. She's not able to logically, reasonably analyze. And by the way, why not have both sides of the question? Why not have Roy Moore get on there to the UN and tell them the truth? They don't want the truth. They want to use this hype and fear to move people towards giving more control to government. Because for them, big government is the answer. The idea that the world is overpopulated. Oh no, there's no room left. Have you flown over the United States lately? Have you flown from the West Coast to the East Coast lately? Overpopulated, you can go for hours and not see hardly anything. In fact, oh look, there's a town. Wow. There's miles and miles and miles of just wide open space here in the United States. The idea that the world is overpopulated and we're ready to go extinct because of overpopulation is a lie. Okay? And now, with this being told, by the way, what's going on right now, young people raised in America, how many of them are doing what Dan and Megan did and getting married and thinking about having a family? How many are doing that? The number is plunging. Okay? The vast majority. Again, I've told you this before, my friend at soccer, Nick. I say, Nick, you got any grandchildren? No, he says, I'm so mad. My God, tell my daughter, man, why don't you guys get married and have some, I want some grandkids. He's my age, almost my age. No grandkids. His children aren't even getting married. They're not even interested. They just want to, and this is the way it is all across America, so that the number of Americans being produced by Americans is going right over a cliff. And the net result of that is nations all over the world, 115 countries and territories are dying off because they're not even having the 2.1 children necessary to just to replace the current population. You know, for a long time I thought, real estate is the really smart investment. I'm going to have second thoughts about that. Because at some point, we have this notion, oh, my house is my investment. Well, if the populations are dropping worldwide, and they are, at some point there's not going to be the same pressure of more people to buy. And so this notion that we got to really stop and do some thinking about what's going on right now, but the idea of overpopulation of the world is another lie. It's just a lie. And who got the entire movement started of environmentalism? Karl Marx. 1883, in a paper written by him and Fred Engels, The Dialectics of Nature. Everything was the dialectics. They talk about global cooling. Well, they got that part wrong, but that's okay. So these names, and he has all the names in there. And we follow the names. Earth Day, celebrated on April 22nd. Why? Vladimir Lenin's birthday. How nice. United Nations Charter. Who was it written by? Did you know that before? I didn't know that before. He's the United Nations Charter written by a known communist, Alger Hiss. Unbelievable. Okay? Wow, the things that we learn, huh? And when Jim Sims, or when Trevor Loudon's friend was being trained in Moscow to be a communist, world leader, the Soviets are openly telling their students that the UN belongs to them. That's their tool for getting things done. Okay? Agenda 21, blueprint for constructing the New World Order. So many of these things, we just are oblivious to what's going on and what they're doing. How many of you knew that Mikhail Gorbachev, what he's been doing? Were you familiar with that? He's in San Francisco, and he's started a thing called Green Cross. What's it called? Green Cross International. And what's he promoting? He's promoting bigger government. So Russia, under Mikhail Gorbachev, bastion of ecological, taking care of the environment, right? Right? Russia, under Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet Union, boy, they really were concerned about the environment, right? Yeah, as concerned as our current governor is about cleanliness in California. I think we have one of the filthiest states there is. I think you can do better going to Oregon. For goodness sakes, at least they keep their freeways somewhat clean. What a disaster. So here he goes from being, head over a country that is polluting like crazy, and now he's the head of an organization that's devoted to global cleanliness and environmentalism. Something doesn't add up in the equation, and it's because it has nothing to do with taking care of the environment. It has to do with promoting big government. These people are working. There he is, all smiles with former presidents, and wow. And it's all about collectivism. Okay. The Earth Charter. Earth Charter? What's the Earth Charter? Oh, that's the map for how to take care of the environment in the 21st century. It's written by who? Mikhail Gorbachev. What? What on earth are we doing? Okay. And then Dr. Patrick Moore, the guy that was the original founder of Greenpeace, says the agendas that they have in place, if they're actually brought into effect, will do more damage to the environment and to people than if we did nothing at all. Okay, Rusty, let's do electoral manipulation.
In 1995, the Marxists, Democratic Socialists of America, 7,000 members, Gramsciist communists, they believe in revolution through infiltration, they took over the AFL-CIO. They took over the American Labour Movement, and they put their member, John Sweeney, in as president. And now their protege, Richard Trumka, runs it for them. What they did, they then took over every single major labour union in the country, and that leverage enabled them to take over the Democratic Party. Because there's hardly a Democrat at any level in this country, from county commission to federal, who doesn't owe his job to the unions for money, for manpower, for get out the vote, even for vote fraud. They mounted a purge at the higher levels of all the Southern Dixiecrats, the conservative Democrats, the moderate Democrats, and now the Marxists, through the unions, have completely taken over the higher reaches of the Democratic Party. So you've got 20,000 card-carrying communists in your country are dictating the policies of the Democratic Party, which is controlling the lives of 300 million Americans.
If this is hard to believe, I encourage you to go to the Communist Party USA's People's World or the Democratic Socialists of America's Democratic Left, and you will see every single issue they are promoting today will be the exact issues the Democrats will be putting on the floor of Congress tomorrow.
And you've got all these loyal Democrats out there, good patriotic people, who still think they're voting for Harry Truman and JFK. Look, by the standards of today, do you think Harry Truman or JFK would have a chance in today's Democratic Party? Those guys today would probably be in the Tea Party. Yet their party is now run by communists, and all these loyal Democrats all over this country are still voting on party lines and basically voting for Marxist and anti-Americans because they do not understand their party has been taken over.
It's no longer just an opposing party with different views. It is our enemy working as fast and furious as they can to finish the quiet revolution that started over 100 years ago. And that is why every issue is being used against us as a weapon to destroy.
So the process is simple. The Marxists set a policy. It might be socialisation of student loans, or green jobs, or cap and trade, or card check, or a New START treaty with Russia, or Obamacare, or immigration amnesty. They're behind the campaign to end fracking. They're behind the gutting of your military. They're behind the dumbing down of your schools and Common Core. All of these programs that are affecting every American every day is being orchestrated by small Marxist groups who have been able to take over the labour movement of this country, and by doing that they then took over the Democratic Party and are now running the country. They're effectively running the country.
I contend that sooner or later they will use violence. They'll use violence when they get to a certain percentage. If they can get 70% of the people behind them, they will wipe out their opposition, because the socialist communists cannot stand competition.
They have to take America down, then they can have world government, and the communists will then throw off their mask and they will have worldwide Leninism. That is their plan.
Electoral manipulation. So, boy, just a few years ago, we wouldn't dare talk about political parties at church because it was considered so controversial. And I would be surprised if there weren't some of us right here that used to be part of the Democratic Party. I know of many Christians that at one time were part of the Democratic Party because it seemed like it represented where they were coming from in certain areas. But what's happened, it has, like he said, does it make sense, the whole idea of how they've used labor unions to take control of the Democratic Party? I mean, again, if you just look at it on the surface, you think, well, my parents were voted Democrats, not mine, but speaking rhetorically, my parents were Democrats, and they believed that the Democrats were taking care of us common people, and the Republicans were the big money people and big business people. And so the current group will throw little tidbits to try and keep you thinking that's the way it really is, when in fact they've completely changed course. And just to you think about the power of the labor unions and how that works. Once they got into positions of power in the labor unions and begin manipulating things, this is why right now there's a trend in some people trying to say, hey, wait a minute, we don't want to go the direction the labor union is taking us. And the labor unions are fighting like crazy. And this is another reason why Donald Trump is such a threat to them. Whether you like Donald Trump or not is not the point. The point is, he's a voice trying to call attention to the American people to wake up. Think about what's happened this week. Look at the anger on the faces of the Democrats. What's going on? Why are they so determined to push for impeachment right now? Because he's winning, because he's doing good things that people are looking at, and they're starting to lose some of their constituency. They're starting to lose some of the black vote. They thought the black vote was entirely theirs no matter what. They're starting to lose some of the Hispanic vote. They thought that the Hispanics were guaranteed to be on their side. The Hispanics are waking up and saying, wait a minute, these people do not represent us anymore. First of all, they're in favor of abortion, and they're in favor of a whole bunch of things that the Hispanic people in general are opposed to. And then if you take the Hispanic vote that's in Florida, that came from Cuba, those people have already seen communism. They want nothing, or Venezuela, smaller group, but those people want nothing to do with this moving in this direction. And so those people are aligning with Donald Trump. Whether they like the guy personally or not, it's not the point. His policies. What happened at the UN? Did you see what happened outside the UN building this week? Here was a bunch of protesters out in front of the UN. Who were they? No. Iranians. The Iranians who live in America, who have fled and live in America, were out protesting, saying, take down Governor Rouhani from the leadership in Iran. They're all Trump supporters. They're all Trump supporters. Yesterday, I was here doing some business, and I got a phone call from Arad. Haven't talked to Arad for several weeks, and Arad is a young man that I met playing soccer, and he put his faith in the Lord, and he's working in police work. He lives in Sacramento. He goes to a church in Roseville, Calvary Chapel Church, but he loves the Lord. He's taking young people to church with him every Sunday. And he bought himself a new car. And he took a picture of himself standing next to his new car, and he put John 3:16 on there and put it on his Facebook page. Well, he has a lot of Iranian friends that connect on Facebook with him. And before you know it, he gets a message back on his Facebook page from somebody in Oman or in Iran. I think in Oman, he said, somebody in the Iranian police, and the guy said, don't think that we can't come to America and take you out. Don't think we can't find you. And he wrote back and said, you know what? Now I have found the true religion. You can't frighten me anymore. And he said, besides that, he said, in America, we have a thing called the Second Amendment. And he says, and all my friends know about the Second Amendment too. So he says, you might want to be careful. And I think to myself, I don't know if they answered back after that. But the point is this. There are groups of people, the Iranians in America, by and large, are overwhelmingly in favor of Donald Trump because they see him pushing back on, and have we already gotten to the point in the video where it talks about the connection between communism and Islam? I can't remember if we've gotten that far yet or not. No, I know not today, but from last week's, I can't quite remember. In any case, we did talk about it. Okay, what's the guy's name? Hormuz Shariat, the guy that talked about the connection, because the Soviets have been promoting all of the insurgents amongst the Muslims for 50 years. They've been working on it. They've been training their leaders to stir up hatred against the United States, because that favors them. In the end, they don't care about Islam. By the way, as he pointed out, neither do the leaders in Islam care about Islam. They care about power. It's not about their religion, it's about power. So, and he says if you have any doubts, go to their websites, People's World or Democratic Socialists of America's Democratic Left, and you can find that every one of these issues, the issues they promote today is what the Democrats will be promoting in Congress tomorrow. It's that cause and effect, and it's frightening for us to think about. Okay. So I think it's important just to read a little bit of what he said here. So the process is simple. The Marxists set a policy. It might be socialization of student loans or green jobs or cap and trade or card check. Isn't it interesting, all these little phrases? And these are all things that are really happening. Or a new START treaty with Russia or Obamacare or immigration amnesty. They're behind the campaign to end fracking. They're behind the gutting of your military. They're behind the dump your military. Trevor Loudon. We have to have a guy come from New Zealand to inform us about what's going on in our own country. Isn't that something? They're dumbing down, they're behind the dumbing down of your schools and Common Core. All these programs, they're affecting every American every day, has all been orchestrated by a small group of Marxists who've been able to take over the labor movement, and by doing so, they've taken over the Democratic Party, and they're now running the country. They're effectively running the country. And then Dr. Noble says that at some point they will get violent. At some point they will use violence because they can't stand competition. Why do they have to have impeachment? Because they know they'll lose at the ballot box. They're really, really, really running in panic mode. They were sure that socialism was a guaranteed slam dunk by 2020. And Donald Trump is a real bone in the throat, right? It's like getting a chicken bone caught sideways in your throat, and that's what he is to them, and they're full of anger and hatred because he's dangerous to them and their plans. Well, and the reason guys like Trevor Loudon from New Zealand are so invested in warning us is, as he said, if America goes down, there's no hope for freedom in the world. It is one world government. Yes, Mike? One world government's coming. Exactly. Yes, Whit?
What startled me is that much of my training as a chaplain has been provided by the Green Cross School of Traumatology. They are probably the largest single organization in the United States to provide people to respond to trauma and crisis.
No,
I've been certified through the Green Cross School of Traumatology and had no idea on that. I'm going to be doing some research.
He calls it Green Cross International. Is it the same thing?
I believe it is, because I just looked, I confess, I just snuck onto my iPhone to look.
That's where our that's where our bandwidth is going.
And I think there may be now, the people that trained me were not out of San Francisco, they were out of like Minnesota. But we've had chaplain conferences where the major speaker is a very prominent person with the Green Cross School of Traumatology. And a lot of the times when they have some kind of a crisis like 9/11 or whatever, that the people that actually dispatch the chaplains into those situations are from this Green Cross organization. So I don't know what all the connections are, but it really startled me this morning.
I appreciate, I hope you follow up on that and let us know next week if it's the same organization. It wouldn't surprise me. But wow, no, it's shocking and frightening to see, well, where we are heading. Here we go.
Like my pastor, he spent 5 years in prison. My cousin's husband, he spent 9 years in prison. He was a pastor. Because they say, no, you cannot worship in this way. You can worship to your God only as we say to you. So when government coming inside in our lifestyle, it's really bad for us. It's really bad. So
the Chinese has a system called re-education through labor. Any police officer can issue you a re-education through labor system that can make any Chinese citizen arbitrarily sent to a labor camp for up to 3 years without needing any due process at all.
My younger brother was 16 years old. He was politically active minor, 16-year-old. And they arrested him. This was in the 80s, early 80s, put him in jail. And they told my mom, who was visiting, don't worry, he's doing okay. We're going to release him. They kept him 2 years until he turned 18. And one day they called my mom, said, come and get his body. We killed him. And no reason, no court, why. He told me he's okay, he's making progress. And they charged my mom for the bullets that killed my brother. They said, we spent this much, you have to pay us to release his body. You have to pay for his execution.
Don't want to live through this again, but I am living it. You know, every day is one more provision, one more thing that you cannot say. And
It's no secret that totalitarianism resulted in the slaughter of hundreds of millions of people during the 20th century. But what most people don't realize is that the environmental movement is now setting the stage for the slaughter in this century of billions. Since humans have now been labeled the greatest enemy of Earth, and the planet has been elevated to God status through the resurrection of ancient paganism, things that were once unthinkable are now becoming thinkable. If you don't think there's a religious element to this, they have made an exact replica of the Ark of the Covenant from the Bible to carry Mr. Gorbachev's Earth Charter. And people literally are worshiping it, praying to it, and placing gifts before it. And if you think this new paganism won't include things like human sacrifice, think again. Just during the 8 years of Obama, the child sacrifice worldwide through abortion has exceeded 320 million babies, the entire population of the United States.
Under the new Agenda 21 movement, we've been demoted. We are now below the earth. And if we are less than the earth, then there is no tyranny against man that cannot be justified under the premise of protecting the environment.
Honest environmentalists will all tell you, well, a good number would be, no, we have 7 billion now. They won't say a billion, they'll say probably a few 100 million. Okay, then you ask them, how are we going to get to that number? How are we going to get to that number? And they look at you with a blank look. Because abortion and sterilization isn't going to get us there, so how are we going to get there? And then I will always ask them the question, you want a war? Will a war work for you? How about a plague? Will a plague work for you? How about starvation? Will starvation work for you? And you know, in the back of their mind, they're thinking all those things will work for them. Because there's no way you're going to reduce that many people on the planet to get it to where they think it's sustainable. And of course, at the same time, they're thinking, and I'm going to be one of the chosen ones who will be allowed to live.
So I love the segment where he interviews people that have been through it. That should be an eye-opener to us. So you have the Benjamin Pinkovich from Russia, and they say, no, you cannot worship this way. You can worship to God only as we say to you. Chinese has a system called re-education through labor. Any police officer can issue you a re-education through labor system certificate. Can you imagine? Arbitrarily sent to a labor camp for up to 3 years without needing any due process at all. And that's, what does that do to a population? You live in absolute fear. Because constantly, and again, you talk to Arad about Iran, and they've been in a very similar system. If an authority doesn't like something you say or do, bam, you're arrested. And then, as what's his name, Hormuz Shariat said, his 18-year-old brother, 16-year-old brother, and they say, oh, don't worry, he gets arrested. Next thing you know, after probably a few years, oh, you can come pick up the body. By the way, we're going to charge you for taking care of him. Wow. And then Augustin Blasquez from Cuba almost couldn't understand what he said. He said, I don't want to live through this again, but I am living it. He's here in America. He sees what's going on. He says, I'm living it. Every day is one more provision, one more thing that you cannot say or do. Okay? And so then Curtis Bauer says, what most people don't realize is that the environmental movement is now setting the stage for the slaughter in this century of billions. So Barbara sent me the thing about Bill Gates. Wasn't it you that sent it to me? Yeah. And you know, it's so interesting because the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing came out, and we're looking at that, and we're finding out that from the Jeffrey Epstein thing, we're finding out through the news that there was a connection between Jeffrey Epstein and certain university laboratories and Bill Gates. Okay? That was a confirmation of what's being said about Bill Gates, that he's actually working with university laboratories to figure out ways to fill the atmosphere with dirt that'll shut out the sunlight and cause destruction of the growing capacity to cut food production all over the world. Say, what? How is this even possible? You know, Bill Gates' partner, that just was a co-founder of Microsoft, just died not too long ago. What was his name? Paul Allen. So, you know, he developed this humongous, the world's largest ever built airplane. It's like 2 fuselages, each with its own, no, it's got eight jet engines, I think, 8 jet engines on it. It's this massive thing. It's supposedly to launch satellites or to launch rockets so they'll attach a rocket to it or a space travel device, and then they'll fly off with this, and then they can launch from up there. Well, when Paul Allen died, the program got temporarily suspended. They laid off a bunch of the people that were involved, but they'd already built the thing and they'd flown it once. Flown the thing once, and it flies. It's, you know, viable. Well, it just came out in the news this week. The program is up and running again. And all of a sudden it occurred to me, wait a minute. What are they going to actually do with that thing? Is it really about launching space vehicles to fly, or because it can carry a massive load? It can carry a great big huge pod between the 2 fuselages. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness. And they are working on technology already to spray things into the atmosphere. You're going, you gotta be kidding me. But if their agenda really is to wipe, they said what did they say would be the ideal number on planet Earth? It's not even, it's a couple hundreds of thousands, they said. No, a few hundred million. Yeah. But to get from 7 billion to a few hundred million? So he says, what do you really want? Do you want war? Will a war work for you? How about a plague? Will a plague work for you? How about starvation? Now think about this. They're determined to cut down carbon dioxide. What will that do? It will limit food production. So they're out there saying it's pollution. Carbon dioxide is pollution. When it's exactly the opposite. It's fertilizer for living things, for food production all over the earth. they're flat out lying to us. And even many Christians are buying into it, saying, oh yeah, carbon dioxide poisoning, pollution. It's a bold-faced lie. And our kids in school, this is being crammed into their heads, and so that a 16-year-old gets up at the UN and is all tearful, you're destroying my planet. When in fact, it's an absolute lie. It's just the opposite. Because they actually, what they want to do is reduce carbon dioxide to limit food production so that people will die of starvation all over the earth. Wow. We have got to get the information out to people we love. Okay, let's hit this last section, or it's not the last section, but let's go with Goliath here.
The odds are against us. We have seen the trends move in the direction to oppose the Christian faith, to oppose family, freedom. Socialism is on the rise. And I think people are intimidated by the giants. What we need are Davids who show up and say, who is this uncircumcised Philistine who should defy the armies of the living God? Who does this big guy think he is? And then you go and get your 5 stones and you launch one into the head of this thing. That's what we need.
It takes a certain commitment to not an election cycle, but an intergenerational commitment to ideals which, if implemented, can change society. We've seen it happen for the other side. We should expect nothing less than the same kind of time frame and the same kind of pledge. Only ours, I think, is more deeply. Our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor. Honor fits in.
And the Republican Party has an establishment that has given us some losers for candidates. It's time for the grassroots to rise up and reassert itself.
Listen, as Christians, we have a spiritual, moral obligation to vote.
We have to go into political office. We have to network with each other. We have to dislodge these professional politicians and collectivists.
And there are people who think that the job of precinct committeeman is the most important.
We have to take back over the Republican Party. I attended my first county Republican meeting in May of 2006. Within a couple months, I was asked to be the precinct committeeman for my area because the position was empty. And then, only 11 months after I attended my first meeting, I received a call one morning from the governor asking me to be the new representative from my district. Did you know about 35% of the precinct committeeman positions are empty nationwide? We need to fill them with real conservatives and take the party back from the ground up. Number one, we need to bank locally at small independent banks so the money stays in our communities to make them stronger and more self-sufficient. Stop using the big banks. We are funding our own destruction with every dollar we give them. Number two, we need to get out of debt. This will make us economically stronger as individuals, which will make us stronger as a nation. Number three, be productive. Start new businesses. 100 years ago, 70% of Americans own their own business. Today, it is less than 20%. Fathers need to come home and start utilizing the incredible potential of their families in creative home businesses. Number four, mentor youth to be entrepreneurial. That is where the money is and true independence. It also eliminates the need to go to college, where we are losing all of our children. And number five, buy USA every time you can. It keeps the money home instead of funding our enemies. It provides jobs for Americans. And most importantly, it stops rewarding all the countries of the world that have enslaved their people for profit.
Well, I think the worst thing that a Christian can do today is send their children to these cesspools we call schools. They're not public schools, they're government-run schools. At the end of the day, the curriculum is secular humanism, and it conflicts with what that child may hear Sunday morning and Wednesday night at Bible study. So we set them in an environment of absolute confusion, and then they have no determinant for a right and wrong.
And this guarantees that a socialist, humanist, totalitarian approach to life will always emerge victorious, generation after generation after generation, until parents step in and say enough, until a few of us stand up and say, we're tired of losing, we're not going to play this anymore.
And the only way you're going to reverse the trends is if you start interjecting a biblical worldview back into the hearts and minds of our youth.
The Bible says to bring them up under the nurture and admonition of the Lord. The scriptures tell us that we'll give an account for everything, especially for the stewardship of our children.
It is a father's responsibility to make sure each of his children understand the world around them so they aren't deceived by every clever-sounding lie that comes along.
And I think the direction we ought to move as a culture is to the point where we essentially disband the entire educational infrastructure. And if we're going to collect tax dollars for education, then we say to parents, here are the education dollars that we have devoted to your students' education. It's yours. So if you want to enroll your child in a homeschool, if you would like to enroll your child in a private Christian school, education dollars follow the student to the school of the parent's choice.
We can no longer sacrifice our children on the altar of convenience. Number one, we need to demand of our representatives that they stop the UN from putting all displaced Muslims worldwide in America.
You know, there's 56 or 57 countries that make up the Islamic Conference. If you've got a Muslim in one Muslim country that needs a place of refuge, they've got 56 other places where they ought to be able to go.
Number two, we must be sharing the gospel with those who are already here in America, praying that they will get saved and go from being a threat to us to our brothers and sisters in Christ.
If you want to reach out to Muslims in America, reach them early and reach them with love. In Islam, there is no love. That's the weak point of Islam. If you want to invade Islam, that's their weak point. Because Allah in Islam has 99 names and not one is love. There is no commandment to love and forgive one another. So when you love people and you love one another and you love God, you are piercing the darkness of Islam in a major way.
Stop right there, Rusty. So we got not too much more and we're done with this video, but there's so much here in this section. How do we take out Goliath? And he started out by talking about we need Davids to show up and say, who is this uncircumcised Philistine? Where did Davids come from? They better come from Christian homes. I've been studying this topic of prayer. Whit lined me up to be a speaker at a conference of our pastors here coming up this month, October. And thank you, because the assignment has driven me to go back and study Scripture and get on my knees. Think about this. You're going to go give 4 sermons to pastors about how to pray. Man, that's scary. That's frightening. I mean, anybody can stand up and read out of a textbook and say this is what's supposed to be prayer, but quite another to say, here's my example, follow it. Oof. How can we have Davids stand up to what's going on if there aren't Christian homes where we are sold out to Jesus Christ? We have got to go back. Listen, we need a revival. We need to reinstitute prayer meeting at church. By the way, we have one every Sunday night. And also we pray before Sunday school at 9 a.m. There's a group that meets. And if we want to talk about getting serious about our country, it's got to start with our hearts and our spiritual need. And if we miss this point, we've missed it all. Joan, you had your hand up.
The principal spends time with each new family that's going to come as an interview type of a deal. And he always, I'm not saying I agree with it or disagree with it, but he always asks the dad, do you have a special time each day, either praying or reading? And he says, they just kind of close down. So in the junior high, there's 38 kids. Kate asked the students, how many of you spend, just raise your hand, a family time where dad is talking to you? 38 kids. Christian homes, they have to be at least said Christian in order to get into the school. 2 kids raised their hand, yes, dad does something with us. That is horrible.
Okay, that's the reality. If we do not deal with this in the level of our own homes and as Christians in our churches, and that's not an outlier. That's true, I think, all across America. I know it is. Okay, so Davids, where are they going to come from? We really need a revival. We really need for those of us who are Christians to get awoken. All right, we need to get woke up, and the only way that's going to happen is when we get on our knees and begin to cry out to God. There's no other answer for it. Okay, so then they have a whole list of things that we can do. Electoral manipulation. What's the action? Did you catch what basically he said to do was action for the electoral manipulation? We need to vote. Get involved. We need to get back. And he says, the Republican Party, because probably that's the only party that's going to have a hope of making a difference in the right direction. But even that, here in California, the Republican Party is Republican in name only. I'm sorry, there's the leadership in the Republican Party, I have a suspicion, are probably leftists who use their money and influence to occupy the places of leadership in the Republican Party to make sure it doesn't really vote conservative. I really believe that. I'm right, there we go. But the only way that can change is if Christians get involved. We get involved in a lot of things, don't we? But maybe we're involved in some of the things that aren't really going to make any difference. And we need to get involved in some things that do. Okay, talked about economic espionage. This was interesting, and I don't have any time, so I'm not even going to talk about it. We'll talk about it next week, because I think it's worth talking about. Okay, I said I have 2 copies left of the double DVD, 1 and 2, but I think I just sold one of them. All right, Charlie's on for one. I still have one. This one has been opened, but it's still in perfect condition. So if anybody wants this, what did I say? John wants it. $19. Thank you. I forgot. Don't throw that one because it's open inside. Okay, be back ready to go in 10 minutes or so. Okay, and if people are chatting when the thing starts, help them quiet down. It's time to get ready for worship.